All right, ladies and gentlemen. So Mike and I had the great pleasure and or misfortune, depending upon the way that you view it, of watching Godzilla versus Kong. I wanted to give my initial reaction, and then Mike will give his review, and we'll kind of discuss. I am curious to know what he thinks. We did actually see it together in person, and I think that my understanding is that I kind of understand what you think about it, but we'll delve more into it. So I thought that this movie was abysmally terrible. It was actually worse than I thought it was going to be. And I had high expectations because the Rotten Tomato score comes in and it's 80%. And I'm like, okay, well, that's a good sign. At least some critics like it. Typically, if it's a blockbuster movie that's kind of low rent and crappy, the Rotten Tomato score will come in at like 20, 30%. But this came in at 80. So it made me believe that it has a good story or something about it is compelling in some way. And then you watch the movie. And by the way, we're getting into full spoilers in this because this movie is not worth having a spoiler-free review of.
Oh, spoilies.
Here's the thing about this movie, and I'm just going to reveal the plot, is that it's actually not Godzilla versus Kong. It's completely misleading. What it is evil corporation controlling Godzilla, compelling him to fight Kong so that they can make a robot Godzilla that's even bigger. And to me, I don't understand why they went with that decision, because then they include all of this sci-fi language about like the hollow core and like, oh, so it's like Earth heaven where monkeys live or something. I don't know. So then there's that. And then there's all this science surrounding how they're controlling Godzilla. And there's this whole like it's so complicated that I don't even remember it. And I saw it 3 days ago. And here's the thing that I'm wondering is that if we go back into the 80s and the 90s, these Hollywood movies were much more simplistic in the way their plots were presented. They were nuanced in their character interactions, but it's like, okay, Jurassic Park, there's a dinosaur park, the dinosaurs get out, and it's bad. Okay, that's, Titanic, a boat sinks, whatever. Why can't they just do Godzilla versus Kong? That's the title of the movie, and they don't do it. They complicate it with all these human plot lines that aren't even subplots. They're literally the main plot of the movie. The side plot is Godzilla versus Kong. You could have had them fight 3-4 times. Instead, they fight 1.5 times. And it's just a total joke. One of the fights is in the water, so it's not even really a real fight. Now, at the end, the third act, there is a straight up like Godzilla type action, which is really good. I don't understand Hollywood's fascination with overcomplicating, and you could even levy this critique of Batman v Superman, which is a very similar overcomplication of a very simple plot that was sometimes unnecessary. And I love BVS, and everyone knows that. And we'll discuss some of the BVS parallels later in our review. But that was my initial reaction, is that the movie was so complicated and such a letdown just from the premise. When you hop right into it, you're like, oh, okay, this movie is not going to live up to its title.
Yes. I mean, I have to agree with just about everything that you said here. I think if I were to break down my review and give you kind of the thesis of my review, is Godzilla versus King Kong with not enough Godzilla versus King Kong. So
exactly.
The plot line was incredibly predictable. From what I had seen in the trailer before we started the movie, I said, okay, so my call is there is going to be an evil corporation that is doing some type of mind control on Godzilla, and it is going to be Godzilla versus King Kong. They're going to fight each other, and then the big bad is going to actually come, and they're going to take a moment and put aside their differences, and they are going to team up and fight the big bad.
Okay, Mike, I have a question, because for the record,
yes.
Mike literally, I can attest to this. Everything that he's saying, he literally predicted the entire plot of the movie. Did you see any leaks, or it was that predictable for you?
Yeah, it was just very predictable. No leaks. I hadn't seen anything other than the trailer and the extended look-in on HBO Max. But
Yeah.
I think that was just an extended trailer.
It was just so funny because we talked a few hours before we saw it, and you're like, yeah, basically there's going to be like this. There's probably going to be like some evil guy who's controlling Godzilla, and he's like making him fight.
Right.
And I was like, no, they're not going to do that, are they? And then I watched the movie, and I'm like, yep, they did it. Yep.
Well, the thought is, because in the Godzilla King of the Monsters and in the first kind of the 2014 or so Godzilla movie that they'd come out with, that was very much Godzilla's not necessarily a hero. He kind of is in charge of just protecting the Earth. So he doesn't really have any vested interest in just going around destroying all of these buildings and, blowing up all of these factories and going on these rampages that he's going on. So it only made logical sense that something was pushing him towards being like an evil character, if you will. So it made sense. And the entire evil corporation, it was so predictable. As soon as you even see, they start the plot line and you see one of the main characters in the movie, who is a female, who's the daughter of the CEO chairman, the head honcho of this evil corporation. First time you see her, she's cruising in on a helicopter, slicked back hair, black suit, black aviators, kind of scowling out the window. And as soon as I saw it, I was like, oh, well, she's evil.
Of
Like,
course.
pretty easy to figure out that this person's evil. But there were so many things in this movie that it stuck with me a little bit too much. And I actually have a list here. So when you're ready, we can go through this list. And, I have too much.
Go for it. Go.
All right. So the first and foremost, I would have loved a little bit of additional explanation into kind of the containment center that they had on Skull Island for King Kong. Nothing really alluded to that. They just kind of said, yeah, there's a huge storm. And, there's a storm on the island, and it doesn't seem like it's stopping anytime soon. So we're going to build this containment. So they jumped right into that. Didn't make tons of sense why that's there.
Right.
And so we have a character that's introduced to us in that containment facility named Eileen Andrews, Dr. Eileen Andrews. And she's kind of supposed to be this King Kong scientist. She knows everything about Kong. She's been living on the island with him for years and years, studying and learning with her daughter. And time again, she proves that she is the shittiest mother on the planet. And she puts her little, I don't know, what would you say is
she's like 7. She's like 7.
Yeah, 7 or 8 years old. And she continually puts this daughter just in some of the most dangerous and compromising situations you could possibly be in. From one, she lives on this island. What is her education like? Is she using this daughter just as a communication vessel for King Kong? Because that's what it seems like. There's no structure to this young girl's life. She's not in school. She does not have any friends. She's, they say that she's the last of her tribe and they all got wiped out in this storm, which they didn't explain enough of. But constantly in dangerous positions. She is in the middle of this massive storm, and you have King Kong out on this boat chained up, and this little girl just wanders out onto the deck of a boat in this huge storm. That's super, super dangerous.
Like, yeah, and it's even more dangerous when Godzilla shows up. When Godzilla shows up, it gets even more dangerous. Like, what?
Yeah. Yeah,
so stupid.
Know full well that Godzilla is going to sense King Kong and come try to fight him. Why would you keep your 8-year-old daughter in harm's way? And then they take the 8-year-old daughter after she miraculously survives this boat getting flipped upside down. And then, basically the boat was about to sink, but King Kong decided to flip the boat over again. So she survived that attack. She sends her daughter with her to the center of the earth. And when they decide to get to the center of the earth and they go into the cave where King Kong finally sits down upon his throne and he gets his axe, and there's these bat-like creatures that attack. Even when they're going into the hollow earth, one of the ships gets blown up by another creature. So she's constantly putting her daughter in harm's way. She's a shitty mother. And I don't know how Child Protective Services have not done anything about this. That was just time and time again. I kept thinking that through the whole movie.
There's so many plot holes in the movie and things like tiny little things like that don't make sense. Some of the villain explanations, I suppose, kind of make sense. This evil corporation is trying to mind control Godzilla, so he's doing terrible things. He's killing a bunch of people, and then that is incentivizing them to make, their version of Godzilla, and it's a power play for them. Okay, fair enough. The problem is just that's not the movie that we want to see. Because here's the other thing that I thought someone made a great point making is that Godzilla versus Kong, already you have a story there, right? So including all these other elements are not super necessary. And what they say in the first act of the film is they're like, well, everyone knows there can only be one like alpha monster or whatever. Like there can only be correct. There can only be one alpha titan. Everyone else is subservient to that titan. So it's like, boom, there you have a plot. Alpha and Godzilla, Alpha, Godzilla and Kong, they can't really coexist together. So if there's some plot of like maybe Godzilla somehow gets trapped on Kong Skull Island or whatever, on Skull Island, that could be something that could have been interesting. And then essentially they battle it out to be the Alpha Titan. And instead, we get this horrible subplot with the 3 human characters who the whole time you're watching and you're like, I don't care what's happening. They're explaining all of this science. They're explaining all these subplots that are so pointless. We just want to watch Godzilla and Kong fight. Now, having humans involved is important because we have the Millie Bobby Brown character. She's been kind of okay in the prior movies. She's not terrible. And I do kind of like the whole like Kong Whisperer thing with the young girl. That is a cool vibe. I like how they're like friends. So there's some good stuff going on there, but it should have revolved more around Godzilla and Kong and less around the world building of the Hollow Earth, which is cool. Like, if you're familiar with some of the comics as well, that stuff is in there, and I believe it's even been in some prior movies. I'm certainly not an expert on these films, but it's not something that they just made out of thin air, to my understanding. But neither here nor there. They're just all this extra fluff to the movie that they felt they needed to add because they're like, well, this is a $200 million blockbuster, so we can't just like do some basic stuff. But the reality of it is, I think this film would have benefited much more if the cast of human characters was narrower. We got more emphasis on fewer characters and a lot more emphasis into the worlds of Godzilla and Kong.
So I'm very glad that you brought up I guess it would be kind of the B plot line with Millie Bobby Brown's character and the other two. And this was something that, I don't want to make this sound more dramatic than it needs to be, but it negatively affected me very, very much because I had rewatched Godzilla King of the Monsters days prior to when we actually sat down and watched Godzilla versus Kong. And her character in King of the Monsters is an integral role in that movie, in Godzilla defeating King Ghidorah and taking up his rightful place as the king of the monsters, the king of the titans on Earth, where all of these other titans bow to Godzilla.
Right.
In this movie, we are introduced, if you had not seen the King of the Monsters, you would not know that character would have ever played a part previously. Because instead of being a character that had, Millie Bobby Brown's character, I don't even remember the character's name. I don't even think they said it a single time. I know that they referred to her father multiple times in this movie, but I don't think they ever actually said her name, maybe more than once. But she was there in King of the Monsters to see Mothra being born.
Right.
She has been up close and she has been very personal. And she was a focal point of King of the Monsters with these huge titans. In this movie, we're introduced to her as just kind of some fringe conspiracy theory podcast listening angsty teenager. And it's like she went from playing a very integral, very important role to move the plot line forward in King of the Monsters to a completely changed character. And I was tracking while we were watching this movie if her plot line did anything for the overall good of the story. And up until the very end, her plotline was nothing more than a lazy way for them to try to explain how this corporation is evil. And I felt it was very lazy, very, very frustrating, because there were just so many plot holes in that subplot. And up until the very end, where they just take a whiskey flask and dump it on a computer to disable some of the features of Mechagodzilla, I suppose, they played zero role in this entire movie, other than, well, we get to see how evil this corporation is because they're sneaking in to infiltrate their buildings. And it was awful.
But like you said, it had no actual impact on the A plot, the Godzilla versus Kong plot. Correct. Until the very, 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 very end. Otherwise, like you said, they're just like driving around and they're meeting and they're trying to go places and they're trying to learn things. And I suppose at some points throughout, they help the audience understand the movie, but they are not integral to the plot really at all. And like you said, that is very different because Millie Bobby Brown's character was integral in Godzilla versus King of the Monsters throughout. And that was interesting. And like I said, I would like to see much more with the relationship between the human characters and the monsters, and also giving time for the monsters or the Titans, whatever you want to call them, to I really liked the opening scene of this film, which is Godzilla just Kong just kind of hanging out. You get to see kind of just some
Right.
B-roll of what his life is like. Godzilla just shows up twice. He's on screen for 12 minutes, and it's just I don't know. It's not enough breathing room for a movie called Godzilla versus Kong. There's not enough of just Godzilla and enough of just Kong, too.
Right. Well, they did a pretty decent job of kind of setting the boundaries of how much are we going to really be interfacing with these characters, Godzilla and Kong. You get much more Kong than you do Godzilla in this movie,
Right.
for sure. So they definitely do set it where you are, just by viewing the way that they do this movie and the storytelling, you are on the side of King Kong almost immediately, where it's Godzilla is destroying cities and King Kong is, showering on this island and he's scratching his ass and he just kind of lumbers around.
Right.
So you I almost had a feeling of he's a lovable oaf type
Yeah.
character, but then when he needs to be incredibly strong and powerful, he can be. But they didn't do a good enough job of making me necessarily care about Godzilla in this movie. In the previous two standalone Godzilla movies, they did a great job at making me really care about Godzilla and hoping Godzilla wins. In this one, I didn't really care. I was kind of he's there. He's going to get killed by Mechagodzilla. That sucks. But at the end of the 2014 Godzilla movie, when he was in San Francisco and he had just killed the other two Titans, the other two Muto creatures, and he was severely injured, I felt something. I was like, man, I really hope Godzilla's okay. In this movie, at no point did I don't even think that I elicited that type of reaction when King Kong was down and out fighting Godzilla. Even when King Kong was about to be kind of got and he was about to, die because his heart's slowing down, I didn't really care. And it's very tough if you're going to make an entire movie about these two alpha creatures duking it out for global superiority to be the Titan if you don't care about either of the Titans in this movie.
And that is exactly the fault of the filmmakers, because like we said, there's so much emphasis on the human characters and so little focus on the monsters that there's not any character development. You might say, oh, well, how do you have character development for Titans who can't speak? Well, like you've said, they've done it successfully in prior films. Just with more interface with those characters, you're able to achieve that, and more time between sort of the link for the audience, or sort of the gateway into the world of those of Kong, for instance, is that little girl. And they have one moment in there that's pretty good on the ship. That one's pretty good. You kind of get
she kind of sticks her finger out.
It's cool, yeah.
And it's that is the moment when you have that real connection from a human character to this large Titan character. And if they would have spent more time investing into those types of moments, then I think it would have been much better. Or what would have been very cool is if they had people more from the Godzilla world that almost have that connection to Godzilla, how you had that little girl having the connection with King Kong. If you could see both of those and see how both of these Titans are directly tied to humanity, and neither one is evil, they just are both alphas,
right,
that would have been much better. But they didn't spend the time to really do that for either of the characters enough. For Godzilla was not done at all. For King Kong, they didn't invest enough, right? So
totally. Another thing that I wanted to discuss, sort of a side tangent, we can go back, but one thing that was really funny when we were watching the movie is that the movie sort of progresses, and in the middle of the second act, I was like, holy shit, this movie is literally Batman v Superman with Godzilla and Kong. And
Oh yeah.
it was crazy because you're watching it and you're like, all right, this is pretty similar at the beginning of the second act. And then the third act starts and you're like, it's the same movie. It's literally the same
Yep.
script, just with different characters. Because literally, catch this, okay? The movie opens and you have two titans, and they can't really coexist together, but their conflict is accelerated by this evil rich man. And he's
Right.
pulling the strings of the conflict, and then they're forced to go together. But then at the end, it turns out that the people, the evil billionaire forcing them to fight together actually has created a bigger threat. And then the two that fought have to go face the bigger threat at the beginning of the third act. And then by the end, they ally together and save the day.
Yes.
Sound like a movie that we saw from Warner Brothers Studios 5 years ago?
Okay. So I'm glad that you said that, because I put in my notes, I'm going to read you this sentence.
Yeah, go.
Batman v Superman legit was the same movie Warner Brothers basically did. The same thing, just without the word Martha, because they caught so much heat. So they
Yes.
didn't, Godzilla's not going to say Martha, right? But it is one
At
of those
the end of
things
the
where,
first fight.
yeah,
Right.
exactly. But it's the same exact thing. It's like, okay, cool. Well, these two are pitted against each other when they really shouldn't be. They should not be pitted against each other. They should be allies, if anything. And in order for them to realize that we need another super evil character that's threatening to destroy the world. And that is 100%. Warner Brothers was like, Batman v Superman made over 500 million at the box office.
It made
Let's just
over
do-
800 million.
Oh, there you go. Well, so I wasn't wrong, because they did make over
You're
500
correct.
in Yanks.
Yes.
But you were closer. All right, so they're like, all right, so let's say 800 million. Let's just do that fucking movie again and make another $800 million. Like that's where they are at
Totally.
this point.
Totally,
It's
man.
like,
It was
just
so funny.
Change King Kong to Batman, change Godzilla to Superman.
Millie Bobby Brown
It's-
is Lois Lane. Millie Bobby Brown is Lois Lane.
Yes. Yeah, it's like it's the same movie,
It's
man. But
it's fucking comedy, dude. It was just as it develops, you realize that it is the
Forward,
same
forward.
template. It's the same template. It was bizarre. And as I said, I love BVS. You might say, well, if they're the same movie, Kobe, why did you love BVS and hate Godzilla versus Kong? Well, for a number of reasons. One, Batman and Superman, you actually get character moments with those characters. You do get time with them. Now, you might say, well, you don't like the Batman or Superman that's in the movie, and that's fine, whatever. But there's at least character development for Batman and Superman. You get to interface with them. You get to see Superman's relationship with Lois. You get to see Batman's relationship with Alfred, etc. Whereas with our two main title characters in this movie, they're just props for the human characters and what's going on with the human characters. So that's a huge difference. It makes a noticeable difference.
Yes, I agree. And I think the most frustrating part about this whole movie is there were some legitimate, very, very cool scenes, some very cool themes, some very cool ideas, and you could feel like, the first drafts of this script were probably super good. But then Warner Brothers just they ruined it by cutting room floor stuff. I don't know everything and all of the struggles that went into the production of this movie, but some of the ideas were so cool, and I'm sure on the initial scripts, they were probably very well thought out and very well explained. But in this, they half-baked a lot of these ideas. And it all even came down to when you have the King Ghidorah's skull, and the DNA that's in the skull is used to telepathically kind of trigger Godzilla to go attack things. Don't fully understand that. They didn't unpack that enough for us. But
They just say it's happening. They're just like, this is a thing. And it's like,
right.
what? This is a thing? And they're like, yep, it's a thing. Next scene. And it's like, oh, okay.
Right. So they show it very briefly.
Right.
And then they move on. Another one of those where if they would have spent a little more time world building and unpacking it, I would have really liked it, is when they actually get to the hollow earth, kind of like the center of the earth, where this massive power source is for King Kong to pick up and go fight Godzilla. That world was very, very cool, with some very cool creatures, like those flying serpent creatures.
Yeah.
Very cool. I really wish we would have had the opportunity to see more of that, and that would have been explored more. But I almost feel like if they would have made this into two movies, that could have been very good instead of just trying to cram everything half explained into this 2 hour. If they really would have extended it, where maybe this one would have been Godzilla versus King Kong, and there would have been these two titans fighting each other for global supremacy, and
And
then
then part two
maybe
is Godzilla v Kong: Dawn of Justice.
yeah, exactly. It's Mecha Godzilla, and it's if they would have done Godzilla versus Kong: Dawn of Justice, that would have been fantastic. Or if they could have called it Godzilla 5 King Kong.
Dude, imagine
But
like part two opens up. So like you said, the first part is all about just Godzilla versus Kong fighting to
mhm,
be the alpha titan of Earth, and then at the end, ideally they need to do something better than what they did in this movie and better than the Martha moment. There's some way to figure that out, but anyway, and then it probably involves the human characters, to the Kong Whisperer chick or Millie Bobby Brown. Anyway, and then part two starts, and it's like they're on the same team. Godzilla and Kong are already allied to fight Mechagodzilla, and the whole
right,
movie is about Godzilla and Kong versus Mechagodzilla. That would have been
correct.
sick. That's what you're
That
saying,
would
right?
have been, yeah, that would have been fantastic because I
Totally,
feel
yeah.
like the bad Mecha Godzilla that we get at the very end, one, we don't see for nearly long enough. For one, how cool they made Mecha Godzilla look. Say what you want about the rest of this flick, but that was one of the shining moments. Mecha Godzilla was a badass
That
character.
was
Like
sick.
that's very, very
That was
cool.
sick. Yeah.
And if we would have had a whole movie of that, where maybe Mecha Godzilla was going around wreaking havoc across the globe, and it was Godzilla and King Kong teaming up trying to stop him, it could have been its own movie instead of
Yeah.
just a 20-minute snippet of this movie. And it's like I'm saying, there were so many opportunities that were just missed here. Um, and it's just full of plot holes that probably would have been explained if there was an extended edition,
Yeah.
if they would have spent more time. Like one thing that I also didn't understand, on two different occasions we see King Kong in this like sedated state. So they take him from Skull Island and they put him on this giant destroyer ship, and you don't get to see how that happens. And that would have been a fantastic moment of connection with King Kong if you'd have actually seen these human characters explain to him, this is not your home. We want to get you home. Like, please trust us. Come with us. We're looking out for your best interest. And if we could have seen that, you almost have that moment where King Kong doesn't know, should I trust these people? Should I not? And then he decides, hey, yes, I'm going to put my faith. I'm going to put my trust in you. That's one of those like connection moments we totally missed out on because it just skipped from, hey, you're the King Kong scientist. You know about this guy. Let's get him to the center of the earth. And then it cuts and he's automatically on a boat sedated.
Dude, yeah.
So by cutting those human moments, those emotional tie moments, it really detracted.
Because the plot is moving at a million miles a minute. There's so much they have to cover with these irrelevant subplots that by the end of
Right.
the story, they kind of end up being irrelevant because the plot is there on the table anyway. Mechagodzilla versus two titans, that's the plot. That's what this movie culminates to. So even this movie is going to have very low rewatchability because once you know how the third act develops, everything that they're trying to like uncover in the first and second act is just so boring, and like you said, it's predictable too. So it's not even like there's some interesting aspects of it, but even if there was, I don't know, it doesn't really culminate in any rewarding payoff at the end.
Right. I put all of these monster movies, and I would say over the last really 10 years, I would classify myself as a fan, a pretty big fan of monster movies. And unfortunately, for this entire Godzilla kind of universe, the Titan, monsterverse, if you will, none of them have really lived up to Pacific Rim. I put Pacific Rim as kind of the gold standard. You just mentioned rewatchability. Pacific Rim, super high. It's a super fun, just exciting universe, super cool storyline. And I feel like every one of these Godzilla, King Kong's kind of Titan monsterverse movies, they're trying to get to that same level of just fun and exciting. Unfortunately, they just keep missing the mark. I think, fortunately for us, they're doing well enough at the box office where they'll keep cranking them out. But none of them have really been to that kind of like S tier, top tier like
Right.
Pacific Rim was. And I have faith that eventually they will come out with one of these movies that has a very well fleshed out storyline, some really, really good character development. They make you really care about the monster and the creature, and you really can feel that sense of impending doom if the earth is going to be destroyed, what have you. They'll hit it eventually. They'll hit that mark, but they just have not yet. And this entire universe has tried time and time again, and they've never gotten there. So we'll see.
We will see. I think that's a great note to end on. Mike, thank you so much for joining. Really appreciate you coming on. If you want to follow Mike further, check out the Is What podcast. Do you want to tell people where to find that exactly?
Yeah, that is going to be available anywhere you can really download podcasts. It's kind of syndicated all over these different platforms: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, the whole nine. Yeah, the Is What podcast, ISWUTT. I'll say what's up to that podcast, and then expect season 2 to start pretty soon. Had to take a little bit of a hiatus because I did move across the country, kind of a big deal. But now that I'm settled, yeah, keep an eye out for more EPs, more Mikes and Omars coming your way.
Very good, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell, follow me on Twitter as well, trying to juice me to 100K. So this is your first video of mine. You made it all this way. 32 minutes of just listening to us talk, then I think you should subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you so much for tuning in. See you guys in the next video. Peace out.